another episode of the Gospel Lifeline podcast. I'm Neal Grogan here with
Matt Statler.
And we are back. We've kind of been on a little bit of a hiatus recently. We have been in the winds, I think is one way we could say that. What do you think,
Matt?
Matt?
A Navy term?
It might be a Navy term.
In the winds.
In the winds. Our sails were full as we've been traveling all over. I was in Ohio for a week. Matt, you were up in, was it Phoenix?
Up in Phoenix, yeah. That's about a 3-hour drive north.
Right. So things have been a little crazy. So we're glad to be back. Sorry, not sorry for taking a little break, but we needed to do it.
Yeah, but, something you can do is subscribe, and that way you're notified every time we post a new one, just in case something like this comes up. Because we're trying to get ahead. I mean, we're trying to get a couple episodes recorded beforehand, but sometimes it's just not possible. Life happens and people get busy, and so if you want, go ahead and subscribe. That will help you be notified. And I know in my inbox I get hundreds of subscription emails. I just delete them all. So just be aware that may be what happens. But we would love to have you subscribe just so that if we do take a day or a couple of weeks off, you'll be notified.
Yeah, and you can always check out our social media on Facebook, and we also post things on there, like when we're not recording, that could prove helpful. But anyways, let's get back into it, Matt. I was just thinking about when I got out of the Marine Corps. There was, at the time, I think there was this really attractive kind of personality for most military or service members when they get out, and it was this idea of the dysfunctional veteran. Have you ever heard of that, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually, we see tame versions and we see extreme versions.
Right.
And the extreme versions will have every single shirt that they own has some kind of veteran signaling symbol.
Look at me symbol.
A look at me symbol. And then when you do talk to them, and because you're proud of your service, I'm proud of my service, and it's nothing but woe is me, doom and gloom, and and it's like it's all like a mixed signals. But you and I, after working with so many of these veterans, I think we realize that there's a heart need somewhere in there, don't you?
Yeah, totally. Well, I was just thinking too. So that's a good characterization, Matt, of the extreme side. But the other more subtle side is, maybe having an unapproachable face on yourself. You might have some sort of hat and a beard, maybe, but basically, when people look at you, they don't necessarily want to approach you. They kind of stand off of you. And, when I got out of the Marine Corps, man, that's kind of the way I wanted things. I didn't want people all in my business, but I started going to a school and finding out no one would talk to me. And I couldn't figure it out. I felt like I was happy. I didn't know what was, I was very not self-aware, but I got into this class, an intro to Christian ministry class. And man, I looked down the aisle, and there was another one who looked like me. Matt, do you recall who that could have been?
I'm pretty sure that it was me, because I was the other angry looking guy with a beard and tattoos, and we just did not fit in to the typical.
We just looked at each other, right? It's like what are you about?
One of those moments. No, I definitely remember noticing you with your dog and obviously beard, tattoos, etc. And I was like, okay, here's another veteran in this Christian ministry thing, and I was open to trying to find an opportunity to have a conversation.
Right.
But I don't think it happened for several weeks.
No. But we were in a quote unquote work kind of atmosphere that would get us in the same room together at least, right? But I remember a couple weeks later walking by the student lounge and seeing you sitting in there reading a systematic theology book by old Grudem, No Way Wayne,
Yeah, yeah, Wayne
and
Grudem.
and we struck up a conversation over that, and the rest is history. We've been friends ever since, but I think about um God's providence in that, number one, because
Yeah,
I wasn't in the business at that time of making friends, but I think it taught me some things on how to make friends. And we're doing this little mini series on spiritual friendships, and we talked a lot about like the aim and the goal of a spiritual friendship, what it looks like in scripture, what direction are they headed, so on and so forth. But there's also some disciplines we have to have as friends, right?
that's
We
right.
have to do some things. And Kent Hughes wrote this really incredible book called Disciplines of a Godly Man. And he actually lays out, and this is good for ladies or fellas, some different disciplines in the context of friendship for us to maintain and to invest in that will help cultivate deeper friendships, one, and just make friends easier. If you're like
Right.
if you're like us, and you have that problem with your face that makes you look kind of more unapproachable.
And you
um
may, you may have lots of friends. My recommendation to you is men or woman,
right.
write these down as you hear them and use it as like a test sheet or an evaluation. Am
Hmm.
I doing this with my friendships? And that may lead you to have a deeper relationship with people, or it could show you maybe where some of the weaknesses in your friendship areas are. Uh, so yeah,
Yeah.
listen in to the different categories.
Yeah, I think it's important. We can do one thing real quick, Matt. I got
Absolutely.
two phrases I want us to think through: strong ties versus weak ties. And what are the things we do in our relationships that cultivate strong ties, or do we remain in this weak tied together? Something easily breakable, or not very. It's just not very strong. Is that person going to show up for me? I'm not sure. They might not. But what we're after is building these strong ties with one another. So,
Yeah. So obviously, if it's a spiritual friendship, kind of the first thing is prayer.
mm,
How often do we pray specifically for God's help in affecting inward changes, for us to be able to have the capacity for friendship?
yeah,
I know for me, I had been betrayed by friends with um, one of my friends just you know uh, went after one of my went after my ex-wife, and to sleep with her, right? And he was a best friend of mine, and we were going and doing stuff together, and he wasn't really a good friend, but
mm,
that was a level of betrayal that I hadn't really experienced before. And so that closes me up. And then then I made friends with a guy, and he ended up dying on that deployment, on my last deployment to Iraq. And so for me, I just really shut out the idea of friendship, because I've been hurt because of the betrayal. And
sure.
so part of the process of making new friends is praying through some of the past hurts, and your own hardness of heart towards friendship. And so
Mm.
that's one thing. What about prayer for you, Neil?
Yeah, I think one of the things I hear a lot is I am not good at trusting others. I hear people say that. Why? I'll ask, who's in your life influencing you, helping you, engaging you, from a friendship, standpoint, of the same sex. And usually I get from guys, even sometimes from ladies, is like what you said, man. I just don't trust. And so, part of that prayer begins with, God, will you change me? Will you affect my heart in a way that will glorify you and cultivate these relationships that you tell me in your word are good for me? you know?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, the Proverbs tell us, woe to him who has no one to pick him up when he falls down.
That's right.
No,
That's right.
no brother to pick him up. It's a warning. So another thing you can pray for, and man, so I grew up in a um difficult area of Dallas, more difficult. I didn't have a lot of friends, especially Christian friends growing up. And me and my mom, we used to sit up at night and we would pray that God would send me a friend one day. And man, I went through my entire um I mean legitimately probably kindergarten through 12th grade, without any real deep spiritual friendships like this. I mean, not until I was a man did I develop some of these friendships, but those were things that we prayed about, even as a young boy. Um, and it's something we should pray about as adults as well. God, would you send me these kind of relationships to have, these friendships to have? If you need a good friend, hey, the best place to start is by asking the Lord for one.
That's right. That's right. And here's another thing, Neil. I was just thinking about as we were talking is in my friendships, I have different levels of friends.
Yeah,
I have close friends like you and I, where we share just the dark nights of our souls and the different things
sure.
that happen. And then I have more surface level friends, and I have some middle of the road friends where I'm testing out the friendship. Um, and so friendship is more of a spectrum in many ways than just a black or white scenario. But I do know that there are people who consider me really close, like their best friend sometimes, and it takes me off guard because I'm just being friendly, if that makes
Yeah.
any sense. And so at times people were like, "Oh yeah, this is my best friend," and I'm like, "Well, I don't really feel the same way." And it's
Mm,
because I was so closed off, and my heart was not ready to open up. And so I had to pray a lot about it and say, God, um, why am I not trusting this person? Have they shown a lack of trustworthiness? And 9 times out of 10, they haven't. It's just my own personal hesitation. And
sure.
so, being open to, who God brings in your life, and not being so desperate for any friend that you're going to immediately make them your bosom buddy, I guess is a one way to put it.
Bosom buddy.
I don't
I
even
don't
know
even
what
know
that
what
means.
I don't even know how to take that.
I don't either. But kind of like David and Jonathan with the closeness there that they have. And
Hmm.
but you also have to have a posture of friendliness. And that's the
Right.
next thing. So the first one's prayer, the second is friendliness.
Mm,
Um, being consciously cheerful, able to ask questions of the person, maybe placing yourself in situations where friendships happen. Um, the sad thing in most of our society today is, where do we find friends? Well, usually at the bar, right? That's usually where people go to find or mingle or anything like that. And um, that's the sad the sad thing about it is the bar. And so if you're trying to stay away from that life, well, where do you go to find friends?
mm,
Well, you have to be open to go into a men's Bible study or a home group or a men's breakfast group, or just keeping your ear to the ground, maybe finding a place to serve in the church where you're going to meet other men. I mean, that for me was really powerful. Was I started helping out in the parking lot, and through the parking lot duties, I found a guy, and he was talking about the prayer meeting, and so he invited me to the prayer meeting, and then I went to the prayer meeting, and just developed friendships through the service.
mm. Yeah, I think our natural disposition is not friendliness. You know, you hear people throw this all out all the time. Like this person an extrovert, that person's an introvert. They're just more. They easily go get people. You know, and I think for the extrovert, it's harder to keep friends. Maybe it's easier to get them initially. For the introvert, it's maybe a little more difficult to get them initially, but it's easier to keep them long term, because there's not this neediness of the relationship, you know.
Right.
Um, but nonetheless, I think it would be a cop out for us to say it's not something we need to work at in general. sometimes it just means putting yourself out there. Like you said, going to a Bible study or someone's house, small group, so on and so forth. You put yourself in a position to make friends, and
Right.
in opportunities of fellowship, right? And then actually fellowship with other people. Don't just like sit there in the corner and um, keep everybody at arm's length. You were created for community, and that requires you to be known and to know others, right?
Yeah, and my son has really had a hard time making friends. My oldest, he's kind of nerdy, and he was really immature last year at school, and so this year he was sitting in the car, and he was like, "Dad, no one wants to play with me." And as a dad, your heart just breaks, right? You start you just want to cry because you're like, "Man, no one wants to play with my son. How lonely that must be." And so I asked him, I said, "Well, do you talk to any of the kids? What do you talk about? Right? Do you have questions that you ask about their life, or is it all about you?" And so we started developing just some conversational questions to show interest in somebody else. And so maybe that's you. Maybe you aren't good at conversation. So look up what are some conversational questions to ask, just to get some practice.
Yeah.
Having it, so when you go to the men's Bible study, maybe have some questions to ask. That's pretty common to ask about, right? Ask about their family. Ask how things are going with the kids at school. I think pretty soon, if you ask the right questions and begin to be a good listener, you'll start to develop relationships, and
Oh,
that's
totally.
important. But it means
Yeah.
that you put some value, right? You're putting value
Right.
into it. The next
And
thing is,
yeah,
go
I
ahead,
think
Neil.
I think what that says, or what you're saying, Matt, is that you have to work at it. Like
Right.
there's some
Yeah.
certain things you have to work in. It might be, researching different ice breaking type of questions to get to know people,
That's
or
that's right. It's
or to
sad,
open
but
yourself up.
it
Yeah.
feels weird, but I mean, so does riding a bike or any other activity. And we're so used to like social media and text messaging, we haven't really done a good job developing face to face conversation. And that's really where these relationships develop.
Yeah, and when you have those relationships, right? Like you have to work at maintaining them to
That's right.
continue to invest in them. I mean, good grief. Part of the reason I feel like we did this podcast was so that we we could maintain our contact with each other, because we are friends. And when you moved out to the desert,
That's right.
on the 310 to Yuma, no, Sierra Vista, but
Tombstone.
uh, yeah, when you moved out that way, it makes it harder to maintain your relationships, right? With when there's distance, so you have to work at maintaining things like that.
Yeah. I mean, and
What
distance, will do that for sure.
totally? What do you find the easiest thing to do with your friend is when you're in a difficult circumstance?
What do you
I
mean?
think I think like when you're talking with a friend and you're in the midst of a hard time, I think probably one of the biggest things you do is you vent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You vent to each other. I mean, maybe grumble is the better word. You grumble and complain,
Yeah.
you're, but one of the unique things that friends do for one another is they affirm the things that matter in each
Right.
other, right? So, like, say Matt, called me and was really struggling with this sermon that he preached and thought he just did not do good. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I have an opportunity, right, to affirm him in the calling that God's placed on his life, the giftings that God has given him, and to remind him of where this glory is to go. It's not for Matt, it's for God. So in a relationship like that, in a friendship, you have opportunities to affirm each other. What has been a meaningful kind of maybe memory? Doesn't have to be us, but just in general of an affirming relationship, like having an affirming relationship. What fruit has that bore in your life, Matt?
Yeah, it's one of the things, like, I know that if I bring up one of my struggles to Neil, I'm not going to get a pat on the back that's simplistic. And so when I say, "Oh man, I'm really having a difficulty with my spouse," or my job is hard here, or something, right? Or man, we're just having some financial issues. Neil's not going to say, "Oh man, that sucks," and just kind of commiserate with me. Though there is some of that, of course, but there's a lot of questions like, "Well, what makes you think that?" Right?
Mm,
Or where are you getting that information, or how have you thought through it? And really, you don't just come out and say, "Oh man, you're so good and you're such a wonderful guy," and it doesn't come across syrupy, but you
you
do
deserve
ask,
better.
"Yeah,
No.
you deserve better." But it is true affirmation, not just a compliment, but a
Yeah.
real strengthening or solidifying, and I really feel like it gives me a sense of boldness.
Mm,
So I'm trying to think of a recent example. Um, somebody had given me some critique about something I had said in my sermon or how I had said it, and I messaged Neil about it and said, "Oh man, like this is starting to turn. I'm starting to see the direction that it could happen," which is normal in most pastoring situations. And
right.
and Neil was like, "Well, what was he trying to? What was he saying? And do you think that that's what you've been doing? And have you looked back?" And it was just really helpful because we walked through it. And at the end of it, I was like, "No, I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to continue to be bold." And that to me is really the power of affirmation. It encourages us to be stronger together.
Oh,
um
totally.
Honest, right? It's honest, and so it's not like Neil and I are over here just swapping compliments to each other, but it's like
Your beard
legitimate.
is so glorious.
"Yeah, you have such a glorious beard, and you do stuff so well," or "You have such a great voice." But it really is like affirmation with a purpose, man. And
Mm,
I mean, I just can't say enough good things about having someone that won't just be like, "Oh yeah, that's terrible. Oh man, that's horrible." But someone
yeah.
that actually helps you, moves you forward, right?
Yeah.
Moves you forward in life. What about you, Neil?
Yeah, I have a really close friend, Justin, and we meet weekly, also. But one of the things that Justin does, I think this might be a good way to define affirmation. A healthy definition for it would be like encouragement towards faithfulness.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that's what godly affirmation is. It's an encouragement, whether it's in the form of admonishment. Think that's a positive warning. It's an encouragement towards the right thing. um, but man, Justin just does a really good job at helping me see things like, hey man, you're going at both ends, like you're gonna burn out. I want to encourage you this week to look for opportunities for margin and for rest. When are you going to let me know your schedule? And
yeah,
like, or else I won't. Like he knows me. So that's been so valuable in my marriage and in my life in general. um, and I have a few friends. You're one of them, that do that for me, that encourage me towards faithfulness, which is what God's calling us to, right? He's
yeah,
calling us to faithfulness, not victory, but faithfulness to Him. And that's, we want friends in our lives. We want to work at having friends in our lives that do those things, and we do those things for others as well. um, but in order to do that really well, you got to do what? You got to listen, right?
yeah,
You have some listening skills. Let's see. One of the probably most difficult things for men, I feel like, is listening to hear and not listening to fix.
right.
And man, sometimes that, uh, I like I know both Matt and I've done it to each other where we've like sent each other something, and then the other person like provides a quick solution, and just like, I already thought of that, fool. You're not even letting me finish my sentence, you know.
Yep, yep,
But man, that's something we got to work on, right? Like in general,
right.
we have to be quick to listen. Let's see. He says when people find that they are listened to by you, they will know that they are important to you. And I
Yeah,
think that's a good picture of that. Um, yeah, not just listening to respond necessarily, but just being present and hearing someone. Um, I had a friend who was on his deathbed,
mm,
and um, he, just sharing some things with me, and I shared some things with him, and we we just cried and sat together, listening to one another. And then even more so when he became unable to communicate. At one point, I would go over there and just read scripture to him, and but he would, I mean, he was listening. You could see his face, like, it was beautiful. But man, friendship is about investing and hearing one another, so that you can point them to Christ, and to remind them that they're not alone, because sometimes it's easy to feel that way, right, Matt?
yeah, and I think listening to, in many ways, when we have conversations, and maybe this is more of a man approach or just a cultural thing, but we basically we speak and we get a product, right?
Mm,
So I say something to Neil and he gives me the answer. Neil says something to me, I give him the answer.
mm,
And that's how we think of it. But really, I think it's more like a bunch of micro loans going back and forth, where the conversation is important, but it's more important in the fact that we're transacting back and forth continually. And so we're building up a series of trust. I mean,
mm.
honestly. And so when we have these conversations, it's not always just like, well, I want to fix your problem, even though that can happen in a
Sure.
conversation, but it's more investing time and kind of
Right.
maybe verbally affirming one another, and which leads us to acceptance.
Mm,
Right, we know that life is full of rejections, all sorts of rejections, awkwardness and silences, and you name it, and we all put our guard up, right?
mm-hmm.
And it's going to be hard because we have to discipline ourselves to be accepting of others, and pay attention to others. Putting down our cell phones and looking at each other in the eye, and um, maybe trying to be a little inviting in your conversational aspect, right? And
Mm.
and and I like how you mentioned we're not listening to respond, but we're listening to hear, because that's so often what we do, right? We listen to what they say, and then we want to say our piece, and so we just only listen so that we can work our our little segment into it.
Yeah, I was doing some observation time for my counseling this last week, and one of the things, the guy who was overseeing all of us in this kind of cohort, one of the things that he would comment on was whether or not you had a good ethos, an inviting ethos. Like, people want to talk to you because you're inviting them in, and you're asking good questions, and you're accepting whatever they say. And I think that's something you have to work at. For one, like controlling your body language. I've seen guys who are sharing very hard things with other men, and they say something, and the guy like smirks or like scoffs, or he, has a visceral reaction, and then there went that opportunity for a friend. um,
Yeah.
we have to control our face. We have to um, desire to accept, to bring people in and not have people on fringes, and that takes work. It takes, and an accepting attitude, and also, a hospitable nature in general.
Right.
Um, which kind of leads us to our last discipline of a friend is to be hospitable or to have hospitality. I think the best way I could probably shore up hospitality, whether or not you nailed it or not, is if you left people with the impression to come back soon.
Right.
Um, I think that's to me that's the best way to capture it. When they leave your house, when they leave your presence, do they want to come back? You know, and that is a direct reflection of how you just treat people. And how you love on people. What about you, Matt? What do you think about it?
I think I find hospitality so tricky, because I grew up in West Africa, and so the culture of hospitality is different than
Sure.
American hospitality. In American hospitality, there's a lot more drawbridges and moats. There's a lot more isolation. Like, you can come to my house, but you have to text me first, call me before you get here, and
Right.
possibly send a letter. Right? Like, there's a whole
There's
system in
rules.
place. Yeah, there's rules because we want to be, we want our own thing, and then when you come to the house, there's like expectations for the home. Right? Is the laundry put away somewhere where nobody can see it? And we start building up all these, I don't know, difficulties, and then we say, well, let's just let the women deal with it, or that's my wife's job, is to be hospitable. But we see the biblical mandate for hospitality. We are, as men, required to be hospitable,
Hmm.
and so for me, that's been a struggle. Is like, I like my isolation, and then sometimes people are inconvenient, right? And I have to be okay with inconvenience, because I love these people, right? And I care for
Right.
these people, and I want them around. And so it's hard to not be like, okay, time's up, time for you all to leave, right? And to do so in a way that's generous. So that's it's always tricky for me. And in full disclosure, like, I
Yeah.
love having people over, and in fact, I'd rather have them come to my house than to go to someone else's house. But on the same time, it's just such a tricky balance, and so that's an area that I really have to be more disciplined in. Is how can I be more hospitable, and that's tough.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one big obstacle people place is that they won't invite other people over to their house.
Right.
Like they won't open their home up for fear of whatever. Maybe they won't like this or that. I remember having Matt and Jessica over to our house with their kids a few years ago, and man, my kids are just acting. What's the term? A fool, I think, and
Right. Acting a fool. Yeah.
acting a fool. And I remember kind of feeling a little embarrassed about it. But hey, guess who else's kids were acting a fool?
That's right.
Matt's kids.
All the time. All the
Yeah, and
time.
another thing that was cool is like after that, Jessica and Brittany, our wives, went and got their nails done together, and they started to build somewhat of a friendship, and so um, you know, but you have to open yourself up to that. If it's just like,
Right.
hey, we talk to each other when we're at work, or when we're at school or whatever it is, that's not that same kind of relationship that we're talking about. You got to get up in each other's lives, in their business, and do life with each other. um
Yeah.
and I think it's important as we close this one out, Matt, to just think through, like, man, Christ did life with other brothers.
That's right.
um Even the women of Luke chapter 8, talks about Mary Magdalene and Johanna and Susanna, and those ladies, that little crew, comes back up like four more times, throughout Luke
Yeah.
and into Acts, and they're together, they're doing life together, they're friends. And man, whether it was Jesus in the garden asking his brothers to pray for him, um, albeit they didn't do necessarily a great job, but they were still petitioning on his behalf,
Yeah.
or Peter, just loyal to a fault, chopping that ear off of the soldier, that
That's right.
Jesus, had to fix. But why did Peter do that? It's because he loved Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus had these deep relationships with these men,
It's funny. He
and
was ready to fight, but not to stay up and pray.
I know. Hey man, I'm gonna play to my strengths, son.
Yeah.
I'm
I
real
like to
tired, but I
sleep
can
and
swing a sword.
I'm here to sleep, and cut people's ears off. Like,
My question is, how do you miss a whole head? But
yeah, I know.
whatever.
Yeah.
But
And
man,
not hit like the shoulder. Anyways, yeah.
yeah, all that to say is that our Savior, who has left us in with this perfect example, um, has paved the way and has shown us how to do these things. And I think if we were to read the Gospels together and we were to really consider each conversation Jesus has, he has heart conversations
Yeah.
with everybody. And in the context of building strong ties and strong friendships, you should be concerned and you should consider that other person's heart. That's what it's about.
That's right.
And if you have someone that does that for you, I mean, the benefits and the fruit of that is beyond your imagination, to be honest. Any closing thoughts, Matt?
No, I think in this book, Kent Hughes, Disciplines of a Godly Man, he lists out some different things you should do, and one of them is write down the name of every friend you have and why you think that they're a friend or a close friend. And I think that could be a beneficial tool because we can say, oh yeah, I have lots of friends until we put them down on paper, and then we realize maybe I don't have as many as I thought. And so
Right.
that would be a wise move on your part, and then become intentional about cultivating friendship with the ones you have and the ones that you might possibly run across. And I know it's an area that I continue to grow in. I know Neal is continuing to grow in it, and Lord willing, we'll continue until we leave this earth. And so that's my encouragement to you. Also, part of being a good friend would be to share and like our podcast and our website and all our our social medias. But on a serious note, if you would, we would really appreciate it. Get the word out. We enjoy it. It's really more for our enjoyment, and hopefully, it's edifying to you, builds you guys up and
Word.
gals up. And so, please like and share. And Neal, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, guys, thanks for listening to another episode of the Gospel Lifeline podcast. Until next time, we out.